I'll never forget the day I finally got the keys to my new house. It wasn't in some perfectly manicured HOA neighborhood with rules about lawn height and mailbox color. Nope. This house was my little slice of freedom, nestled just outside all of that chaos. Tall trees, a winding driveway, and a porch that screamed, "I do what I want." I could already picture myself sipping coffee in the mornings, reading the paper, and waving at the neighbors, if there were any who could actually see me through the thick forest that surrounded the place. As I drove up the winding road, I noticed something peculiar. From across the way in the distance, a car slowed down almost suspiciously. At first, I thought it was just a curious neighbor, but then the figure inside came into focus. A woman. And not just any woman, Karen. I knew her reputation even before moving in. She was the unofficial self-appointed queen of the HOA, a walking rulebook with a penchant for confrontation. She could spot a missing mulch bed from 3 blocks away and make a citizen's arrest with a scowl. And now, she was staring directly at my property like a hawk who just smelled trouble. I parked my car, and as I stepped out, I couldn't help but smirk. "Relax," I muttered to myself. "You're not in her territory, not yet." But deep down, I knew that wasn't going to stop her. Her eyes were practically lasers, scanning every inch of my yard, probably measuring whether my grass was the correct shade of green. My gut told me she was already plotting her next move. I walked up the driveway, taking in the details of my new home. The paint was fresh, the porch squeaked in the most charming way, and the garden, well, let's just say it had potential. I could almost hear myself saying, "This is it, this is my sanctuary." But every step I took toward the front door, Karen's car edged closer, like a shark circling prey. Then it happened. She stepped out of the car, clutching what looked like a clipboard, a notepad, and maybe the entire HOA rulebook under her arm. She squinted at me, hands on her hips, her posture screaming, "Who allowed you here?" I raised an eyebrow and waved casually, hoping to appear nonchalant. Big mistake. That just seemed to fuel her. She muttered something under her breath. I couldn't hear it clearly, but it was loud enough for me to catch the words trespassing and illegal. My heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. I had heard stories of her dramatic antics. This was going to be interesting. I reached the front door, unlocked it, and turned around to face her. "Hi there," I said cheerfully, trying to diffuse what I knew would be an intense showdown. "I'm the new neighbor, technically outside the HOA jurisdiction, but hello." Her eyes widened, and I swear I could see the steam of fury rising off her like some kind of cartoon effect. She opened her mouth to respond, probably preparing a tirade that could last hours, and then froze. Her hand hovered over the phone at her side, dialing like a general calling reinforcements. I walked inside slowly, savoring the moment. Each step echoed with suspense. This was it, the first confrontation of what I knew would be a drawn-out saga. I could hear her muttering through the trees, probably repeating words like illegal, trespassing, report, call, over and over, as if chanting would make my house magically disappear. From inside, I peeked out the window. She had now pulled out her binoculars. Yes, binoculars, I couldn't make this stuff up. She crouched behind her car like a vigilante on a stakeout, scanning every inch of my property. And the best part, I could see the determination in her eyes. This wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. Oh no, Karen had decided I was a threat to the natural order of her HOA kingdom, and she wasn't going to let it slide quietly. I leaned back, taking a deep breath. "All right, Karen," I whispered to myself with a grin. "Let's see how this goes. You're about to learn that outside the HOA, I make the rules." And with that, I knew the peaceful life I imagined was already tainted with the thrill of an unexpected battle. This was just the beginning. I didn't have much time to savor my first victory before Karen made her move. By the time I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, there she was, standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed like she owned the entire world. I swear, she could have been sculpted from rules and rage, with a dash of self-importance for seasoning. "Excuse me," she shouted, her voice slicing through the morning air like a chainsaw. "This is private property. You can't just be here." I nearly laughed. Calmly, I raised my hands in a non-threatening gesture. Hi, Karen. I'm aware this is outside your HOA. I actually own this place. Her jaw practically hit the ground. Then she blinked. Then her hands shot to her hips again, as if to recalibrate her fury. Own it, she repeated, as if that single word were a betrayal so profound it should come with a courtroom trial. This isn't right, I'm telling you, you. I raised a finger, giving her the courtesy of interruption. Look, I understand. You have rules where you live. I don't. We're in different neighborhoods. I mean, that's literally the point of me being out here. Her eyes narrowed, narrower than I thought possible. I could almost hear the gears in her brain grinding, whirring, and sparking as she tried to process this alien concept. A homeowner living peacefully, without her oversight. Then came the gasp. Oh, the gasp. She reached for her phone like she was calling for reinforcements. I'm going to call the authorities, you can't just. Go ahead, I said with a shrug, trying to appear casual. I have all my paperwork right here. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the neatly folded documents that proved I was the legal owner of my property. Her eyes widened even further. I think I saw actual sparks of disbelief. You have papers, she squeaked. Yes, Karen, I have papers. It's all above board, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee, enjoying the ridiculous theater playing out in front of me. For a few moments, she just stood there, frozen, like a statue carved from indignation. And then she made a move. She leaned forward, squinting at the papers like she could magically make them invalid. I don't understand, she whispered. Her voice was almost shaking. You're not supposed to this is. Supposed to what? I asked. Live here legally, enjoy my property. Honestly, Karen, you're a little late to the game. She glared, probably imagining some cosmic loophole that would give her the power to vanish my house instantly. I could see the storm clouds gathering behind her eyes, a perfect foreshadowing of the chaos she was about to unleash on my otherwise peaceful life. Then she did something I didn't expect. She started packing, like a general plotting her battle plan. I'll call everyone. The HOA, the neighbors, this is unacceptable. I leaned back in my chair, the tiniest smirk creeping across my face. Everyone, I asked. Do you mean the neighbors who live in your HOA, or the actual authorities who understand property law? Her fists clenched. She took a step closer, then stopped abruptly, as if realizing that the distance between her and the law was a canyon she couldn't cross. You can't just. I can, I said simply. Technically, legally, and peacefully. And you, well, you can yell, it's your specialty. She blinked rapidly, trying to process this new reality. I was untouchable. Outside her HOA, immune to her self-appointed rulings. And yet, she wasn't done. Oh no, she would never be done. I took another sip of my coffee and watched as Karen stormed back to her car, muttering to herself, probably drafting letters, plotting phone calls, imagining legal maneuvers that didn't exist. And as I stood there, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about property. This was about power. Karen thrived on controlling everyone and everything in her bubble of asphalt and trimmed hedges. And now I had stepped into her orbit. I smiled, a little nervously, but mostly in anticipation. Let the games begin. The peace I thought I had was short-lived. I had barely finished putting my coffee down when I noticed flashing lights approaching from the end of the driveway. My stomach sank, but only for a second. Then I reminded myself calmly that I wasn't doing anything wrong. I owned this property. I followed the rules. But still, the adrenaline coursing through me told a different story. The police car came to a slow stop in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, looking serious but not exactly hostile. Behind them, like a storm cloud determined to ruin my morning, Karen strutted up the driveway, waving her phone and muttering frantically. Officer, this man, he's trespassing. He's breaking the law, she shouted, pointing at me like I'd stolen the Declaration of Independence and was now hiding it behind my shutters. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding out my paperwork with a calm smile. Good morning, officers. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I am the owner of this property. My name is on all of the deeds. The younger officer glanced at the papers, then back at me, then back at the papers, clearly trying to process the fact that Karen had basically declared war on a homeowner who legally existed. The older officer, grizzled and patient, raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, his voice measured, "are you aware this property is outside your HOA?" Karen's eyes widened. I didn't think." "You didn't think," the older officer repeated, his tone a mix of disbelief and amusement. "Ma'am, property laws don't exactly bend for HOA rules. Now, I'm going to need you to calm down." Her mouth opened, and then closed. Opened, closed. She looked like she had forgotten how words worked entirely. I had to bite back a laugh. This was better than TV. I took a slow step toward my porch, letting the officer see that I was calm, collected, and perfectly within my rights. Karen, on the other hand, was flailing like a bird caught in a storm. "She can't do this. This isn't fair. He's," Karen sputtered, pointing randomly in my direction. "I'm supposed to enforce rules, I." The younger officer raised his hand. "Ma'am, do you have any evidence that he's breaking the law?" Karen's fists tightened around her clipboard. I have rules, HOA rules, he's outside your HOA jurisdiction," I finished for her. I tried to keep the smirk off my face, but it was a losing battle. Technically, legally, fully within his rights. She froze. I could see the panic spreading across her face, the gears turning frantically as she tried to find some loophole, some technicality, some magic rule that could make my house disappear. But there was none. None at all. I can't, this isn't real," she whispered, almost to herself. "Relax, Karen," I said gently. "It's real, you just have to accept it." The older officer sighed and gestured toward her car. "Ma'am, I think it's time you head back to your neighborhood. You're causing a scene, and there's no legal basis for this complaint." Karen's lips trembled, her eyes darting between me and the officers like she was considering whether a dramatic feint would earn her sympathy points. Finally, with a frustrated huff, she stomped back to her car, muttering about legal loopholes, and this isn't over. I watched her drive away, the flashing lights fading behind her, and for the first time that day I felt a rush of victorious relief. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't going to give up. She had declared me an enemy of the HOA kingdom, and that meant she would be back, probably armed with a binder full of rules, rumors, and righteous fury. I leaned against my porch railing, letting the adrenaline ebb. The cops were gone. Karen was gone. My property was mine, and my coffee was still hot. And yet, the tension lingered in the air like the quiet before a storm. I took a sip of my coffee, staring out at the road where she had disappeared. "All right, Karen," I whispered. "If you think that was the end, you clearly have no idea what's coming next." And somewhere, in her meticulously trimmed neighborhood, I imagined her plotting. She was a force of nature, and I had just become the obstacle she couldn't ignore. The suspense of what she would do next hung thick in the air, and I knew this battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen didn't give up. Oh no, she wasn't the type to quietly disappear and accept defeat. Within hours of her humiliating retreat from my driveway, I started noticing signs that the gossip machine had already kicked into gear. The neighborhood that had seemed so quiet before was suddenly alive with whispers, curious glances, and what I can only describe as covert surveillance. I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee and pretending to read a book, when I noticed a car slowly rolling by down the road. Inside, a couple of Karen's HOA friends were peering at my property like hawks. I waved casually, smiling as if to say, "Yes, I see you, but it won't work." They flinched and sped off, probably reporting back every detail like a covert operation. It hit me, Karen wasn't just obsessed with me. She had turned my peaceful life into her personal entertainment. The suspense of it all was almost thrilling. Every creak in the trees, every sound of a car slowing down, kept me on edge. I knew she was plotting something, and I had no idea what her next move would be. Then the notes started appearing. Tiny, innocuous-looking scraps of paper pinned to my gate, tucked under my mailbox. One simply read, "This isn't over." Another, more dramatic, "Rules exist for a reason." I couldn't help but chuckle. She was treating the neighborhood like a chessboard, and I was the unexpected pawn she was convinced she could corner. But I refused to be intimidated. I began documenting everything she did, photos of the cars, videos of the note deliveries, timestamps of the patrols. I wasn't going to fight fire with fire, I was going to fight fire with the law. And the law, unlike Karen, was firmly on my side. One afternoon, while I was pruning some shrubs, I saw her silhouette across the street, packing in circles, clipboard in hand. Her muttering was audible even from 50 feet away. He thinks he can just, outside the HOA illegal can't, must enforce." Her voice rose and fell, like a mad conductor orchestrating a symphony of frustration. I waved again, this time with more flourish, and she froze mid-rant. I could see the gears turning in her head. She wanted me to feel fear, guilt, or at least a little panic. But instead, I felt a strange mixture of amusement and anticipation. This was better than a thriller movie. The suspense was real, and I was living it. Later that evening, a neighbor approached me cautiously, a man in his 50s with a slightly worried expression. Hey," he said. "I just wanted to say I saw Karen out there earlier. She's persistent, be careful." I nodded, smiling. "Thanks for the warning, but I think I can handle her. She's dramatic but harmless." He frowned, clearly unsure whether to trust me or my judgment. "Harmless, maybe, but she's relentless. She's probably already planning something bigger." I laughed, more to keep myself calm than anything else. "Bigger? You mean like another note, or a full HOA committee meeting on my lawn?" The next morning, the suspense reached a new level. I found Karen at the edge of my property again, talking animatedly into her phone. She wasn't just packing anymore, she had a plan, and it was unfolding before my very eyes. Her friends had apparently been briefed, the gossip network activated, and she was ready to escalate. I took a step back, sipping my coffee and letting the tension wash over me. Every eye that peeked from behind a curtain, every car slowing down, every note on my gate, it all added to the drama. Karen wasn't just an antagonist, she was a force of nature, unpredictable and relentless. And yet I felt a strange thrill in all of it. This wasn't just about property anymore, it was a battle of wills. Every day brought new suspense, new challenges, new opportunities to outmaneuver her legally and peacefully. She wanted a showdown. She wanted me intimidated, and I was just getting started. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across my yard, I whispered to myself, "All right, Karen, you think you've won the neighborhood gossip war? Just wait. The next move is mine." The suspense of what she would do next hung in the air like a storm cloud. And somewhere, in her perfectly trimmed HOA kingdom, I could almost hear her plotting her next dramatic entrance. Karen's obsession didn't just simmer, it boiled over. By this point, I realized she wasn't going to sit quietly and accept that I legally existed outside her HOA. No, she had moved on to full-scale escalation. Every morning, I'd step outside and see her lurking at a distance, her car parked strategically, binoculars aimed like a sniper zeroing in on a target. It was subtle at first. A note left on my porch. "Your presence is disruptive. Consider this a warning." I chuckled and tossed it into the recycling. She probably thought she was intimidating me, but she had no idea that legal ownership is about as terrifying as a polite suggestion from the government. But then things got theatrical. One afternoon, I spotted her standing at the edge of my driveway, this time flanked by two neighbors from her HOA. They were clearly recruited as her personal observation squad. She was holding a stack of papers, waving them like a conductor with a baton, muttering about violations, rules, and consequences. I walked toward the porch, pretending to be absorbed in my garden. "Good morning, ladies," and I called casually. "Beautiful day for enforcing rules, I see." Karen's eyes narrowed, her face red as she shook her finger at me, her voice rising dramatically. This is unacceptable, you can't just." Technically, legally, completely acceptable, I interrupted, waving one hand toward the property like I was presenting an art exhibit. You're welcome to try to challenge it, but the law's on my side. Her two companions exchanged nervous glances. One whispered something to the other that I couldn't hear, and I imagined it was along the lines of, "Maybe we're in over our heads." The other was taking notes furiously, probably imagining future HOA gossip headlines. Neighbor defies Karen, unpunished. Karen's hand shot to her phone. I'll call the HOA board, they'll. They'll do what? I asked innocently, leaning on the porch railing. Make you feel important, because congratulations, that seems to be working. Her jaw dropped and she took a dramatic step forward. You have no right. This is outrageous. I shrugged and smiled. I know it's hard to accept, Karen, but the moment you realized my property wasn't under your HOA's authority, your world tilted on its axis, didn't it? She froze. I could practically see the storm clouds forming behind her eyes. Her two companions fidgeted, shifting from foot to foot, probably reconsidering their life choices. For the next several days, the suspense grew. Every morning brought new tactics. She would pace, muttering into her phone, probably assembling her next assault of rules and complaints. Small notes began appearing on my gate again, sometimes anonymous, sometimes with signatures like a concerned neighbor. I started to realize something important. Karen's obsession was now turning into a form of entertainment. She wasn't just upset, I was the main character in her personal drama series. And every time I smiled, ignored the notes, or hosted a casual barbecue with a friend, I could see her fury escalate from across the street. Then came her boldest move yet. One morning, I arrived at the driveway to find a large, professionally printed sign leaning against my mailbox. This property is under surveillance. RULES must be FOLLOWED. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Surveillance? Rules? Karen was turning my life into a suspense thriller, but in her mind, she was the hero. I couldn't wait to see what she'd try next. By the end of that week, the suspense reached a new peak. Every time I stepped outside, I expected to see her plotting some grand spectacle. And honestly, I wasn't disappointed. She had clearly spent days brainstorming ways to intimidate me, legal letters, community gossip, possibly even a petition. I knew the next encounter would be dramatic. I leaned back on my porch, taking a long sip of coffee, letting the tension and anticipation settle around me. Karen had officially escalated from passive annoyance to full-blown theatrical obsession. And yet, the irony wasn't lost on me. She was giving me all the suspense, the drama, and the entertainment I could ever want, all for free. I whispered to myself, smiling, "All right, Karen, whatever you're planning next, I'm ready. And this time, you might just be setting yourself up for the biggest surprise of your HOA life." The suspense was electric. Every sound in the trees, every shadow on the driveway hinted that Karen was plotting her next move, and I had a feeling it would be her most dramatic stunt yet. By now, Karen's obsession had reached almost cartoonish levels. Every morning, I expected to see her lurking somewhere on the horizon, clipboard in hand, muttering to herself about violations and illegal behavior. The suspense of what she might do next was electric, but I decided it was time to take matters into my own hands, subtly, legally, and most importantly, humorously. It started small. I planted colorful flowers along the edge of my driveway, nothing illegal, just cheerful and eye-catching. The next day, I noticed Karen's car slowly creeping past. She squinted at the blooms, frowned, muttered something about unauthorized landscaping, and then sped off like a general retreating after a minor defeat. I chuckled. This was fun. Then came the outdoor furniture. I set up a small seating area on my porch, complete with a table and an umbrella. I could see Karen from across the street as she drove past again, this time with two neighbors trailing behind her like loyal deputies. She froze mid-gesture, probably realizing she had no authority over my perfectly legal umbrella. I hosted a small barbecue the following weekend. Just a few friends, burgers on the grill, music playing softly. I could feel her eyes on us the entire time, peering from behind her car like she was scouting a battlefield. Her dramatic gasps of frustration carried faintly on the wind. Each laugh, each cheer, each clink of a soda can was like a tiny victory dance, legally and peacefully defying her authority. One afternoon, she tried to up the ante. She marched up to my property line with a stack of professionally printed notices, her two HOA accomplices trailing nervously behind. I was outside, tending to the garden, and I watched them approach, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. "Sir, you can't just host parties, barbecues, gatherings without approval," Karen shouted, waving the papers dramatically. "This is disruptive." I wiped my hands on my pants and smiled warmly. "Karen, I appreciate your concern. Truly I do. But this property is outside your HOA. There are no approvals required here. Legally, everything I'm doing is perfectly fine." Her jaw dropped, as if my calm explanation had physically punched her in the gut. You can't, this isn't fair." I shrugged innocently. "I know it's difficult to comprehend, but fairness is subjective. Ownership and legality, that's objective." Her two companions shifted nervously. One whispered, "Maybe we should just go," but Karen didn't even hear him. She was too busy flailing, muttering about loopholes, rules, and community standards that didn't apply. I noticed something curious as she fumed. The more she tried to assert control, the more it became obvious to the neighbors that she was the problem, not me. People started looking at her side-eyeing, whispering to each other, probably thinking, "Wow, she's really obsessed over this guy." The suspense of the situation grew. Every day brought a new note, a new glance, a new attempt to intimidate me. But with each move, I had a small victory. I wasn't breaking any rules, and yet I was slowly exposing Karen's obsession for what it was, a theatrical display of self-importance with no legal foundation. One morning, I took it a step further. I hosted a casual coffee gathering right at the edge of my property, just within full view of the street. I waved at the passing neighbors, smiled politely, and chatted animatedly. Karen drove by and almost slammed on her brakes. I could see her eyes widen in horror. Her neighbors in the car with her looked uncomfortable, probably realizing the absurdity of her vendetta. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath and savoring the suspense. Karen's obsession was reaching a critical peak, and I could feel it. Any moment, she would attempt something bold, dramatic, maybe even over the top. But by now, I was ready. I had the law, common sense, and humor firmly on my side. As the sun set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard, I whispered to myself, smiling, "All right, Karen, you've escalated this far. But I've got one eye on the grill and the other on your next move. Let's see what you've got." The suspense was thick, like a storm about to break. Every rustle of leaves, every passing car, every shadow across the driveway hinted at her plotting. But one thing was certain, the next showdown was going to be epic. And this time, I was fully prepared. It was a Saturday morning when I realized Karen was about to pull out all the stops. I had been sipping my coffee on the porch, enjoying the gentle breeze, when I noticed a familiar car rolling down the road. But this time, she wasn't alone. Karen had brought a binder the size of a small briefcase, her two loyal HOA sidekicks, and worst of all, an air of grim determination that suggested she meant business. I felt the suspense tighten in my chest. Something big was coming. I didn't know what it would be, but I knew it would be dramatic. Every move Karen made had been escalating, and this was the climax I had been anticipating. She marched up my driveway like she was leading an army into battle, binder clutched to her chest, fingers tapping furiously on the cover as if it contained some secret legal weapon that would finally take me down. "Sir," she shouted the moment she arrived at the edge of my property, I have evidence, violations, complaints, rules, you." I raised a hand and smiled, calmly stepping closer. "Karen, this looks impressive. That binder must be heavy. Let me guess, you spent all week compiling a document to prove what exactly, that I exist." Her eyes widened, then narrowed. You have no idea what you've done. I have paperwork, witnesses, And yet, I interrupted, holding up my own neatly folded papers. I am the legal owner of this property. I comply with the law. You are outside your jurisdiction. Nothing in that binder changes that. Her jaw dropped. I could practically hear the cogs in her brain grinding frantically. The suspense was palpable, not just for me, but for the small crowd of neighbors who had started gathering, sensing that something big was unfolding. Karen opened the binder, flipping through pages at a frantic pace. I have rules, regulations, bylaws. You can't, this isn't fair. I leaned against the railing, trying not to laugh. She looked like a reality TV villain realizing her plans were about to implode. Karen, I said patiently, I respect your dedication, truly. But this property isn't under your HOA. None of this matters. You've built a mountain of paperwork and it's just paper. Beautifully organized paper, but paper nonetheless. Her two companions shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. I could tell they were starting to realize the futility of the effort. Karen, however, was relentless. She flailed her arms dramatically, making grand proclamations like a one-woman theater production. I will not allow this. I will enforce. I am the HOA. I finally gestured toward the crowd of neighbors who had gathered, many peeking curiously from across the street. Everyone, meet Karen, I said with a grin. She's passionate about HOA rules that don't apply here. A hush fell. Karen's face turned red, the kind of red that only comes from realizing your dramatic plan is failing spectacularly in public. Her binder dropped to the ground with a heavy thud, pages scattering like confetti in a parade of defeat. She froze, eyes wide, muttering, This, I can't, how? I stepped forward, calmly picking up one of the scattered pages. It's okay, Karen. I'll hold on to this for you. Maybe frame it as a reminder that obsessing over neighbors who are legally outside your reach doesn't work. Her companions tried to suppress smiles. Karen's shoulders slumped, and I could see the realization settling in. She had been outmaneuvered, legally and socially, and there was nothing left for her to do. I took a deep breath, savoring the suspense finally giving way to relief. Karen, I said gently, I'm happy to live peacefully, as long as you can accept that this property isn't under your control. That's all I ask. She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly turned and walked back down the driveway, muttering under her breath. I knew she was already planning her next dramatic storyline in her mind, but for now she had been defeated. I stepped back onto my porch, letting the adrenaline ebb away. The suspense of what might happen next lingered, but I felt triumphant. Karen had escalated to her ultimate confrontation, and I had survived, legally, calmly, and with a little humor intact. As I poured myself another cup of coffee, I whispered with a grin, All right, Karen, you put on quite the show, but this is my property, and for now, the stage is mine. After the dramatic showdown with Karen, I thought I could finally relax. The binder had been dropped, her declarations silenced, at least for the moment, and I could feel the tension that had been building for weeks begin to dissolve. But let me be honest, when it comes to Karen, relax is a relative term. You never really know when she might pop up with a new scheme. I spent the next morning on my porch, coffee in hand, surveying the property that had become both my sanctuary and the stage for Karen's personal drama. Birds chirped, the sun glinted off the freshly trimmed shrubs, and for a moment, life felt peaceful. No notes on the gate, no suspicious cars slowing down, no muttered threats over the phone. Just calm. Still, I couldn't resist a little mischief of my own. I set up a small sign near the edge of the driveway, private property, all disputes resolved legally. No drama, please. Just a friendly warning, but I knew it would be visible enough for Karen should she decide to take a casual drive past. And of course, it wasn't long before she noticed. I saw her car creeping down the road again, the familiar glare through her windshield. But this time she didn't stop. She slowed, she gasped, she shook her head, but she drove past without a word. The suspense of whether she would intervene again had been replaced by something else, disbelief. She was realizing that sometimes there is no fight to win, no rule to enforce, no authority to claim. The neighborhood had taken notice, too. A few neighbors waved as I tended to the garden, their smiles a quiet acknowledgement of the absurdity they'd witnessed over the past weeks. Karen's drama had inadvertently created a sort of community spectacle, and I had become the unexpected star. By midweek, I decided to host a small gathering, just friends and family, to celebrate my victory and reclaim the peace I had fought so hard to secure. The grill was fired up, music played softly in the background, and laughter echoed across the yard. For the first time in weeks, the property felt like home rather than a stage for someone else's obsession. And Karen, she watched from afar, packing in the distance like a general whose army had been disbanded. Her frustration was palpable, but there was no binder, no shouting, no dramatic scene this time. She had retreated. The suspense was over, at least for now. I took a deep breath and leaned back, savoring the moment. There's a special kind of satisfaction in standing firm, in knowing that no amount of theatrics, gossip, or obsessive rule-following can overpower legality, logic, and calm determination. Karen had tried to storm the castle. I had held the gate, and now the castle was mine. Still, I couldn't resist a little humor. I walked over to the mailbox and pinned another note. "Dear Karen, thank you for the free entertainment. Regards, your legally compliant neighbor." I smiled, imagining her discovering it later, eyes widening in disbelief once again. Some habits, it seemed, die hard. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting a warm glow across the property, I realized something important. The conflict with Karen wasn't just about property lines or HOA rules. It was a lesson in patience, in staying calm under absurd pressure, and in finding humor in the ridiculousness of life. The suspense had been thrilling, the drama intense, but the victory sweet and satisfying. I watched my friends laugh around the grill, the kids running across the yard, and a few neighbors waving from their porches. For once, there was no shouting, no notes, no hidden cameras, just normal life. I raised my coffee cup in a quiet toast to peace, freedom, and the occasional absurdity that makes life interesting. And as I sipped, I whispered with a grin, "All right, Karen, enjoy your HOA kingdom. Meanwhile, I'll enjoy my property, my legal rights, and the fact that sometimes sanity and the law triumphs over drama." The suspense may never fully disappear when it comes to Karen. But for now, I had my victory, my peace, and a front-row seat to the aftermath of her obsession. And honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better story. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.